So now the lecture is recorded, and I'm going to publish it on the vCamp for your review. I think it's useful for you. You can also use the recordings from the previous edition of this lecture. By the way, can you hear me? Can you say something on the chat? Okay. Okay, so it seems it works. Not sure if I can change to the meeting. Let's try to do it. Okay, now we are in the meeting mode. In this meeting mode, you can switch on your mics and say something, ask me, interrupt my my lecture, my presentation. So today, my plan is as follows. Oh, someone is on there. Okay, so for today, the agenda is as follows. First, I start for vCamp. It's if there is something new, I'm not sure. But the most important entry on my agenda is description of the task one. We are all together, therefore I think it's the best place to present what must be done, what is covered by the task one, how to accomplish this, how to fulfill all the requirements related to this task. So we'll get back to this task. Be prepared eventually to ask me questions. It is my first objective. It is my first goal of the lecture. Second, let's start talking about the data semantics. Previously, we discussed terms like data and information, but how it is related to the type? Because commonly we are talking about the programming, we are using a concept of type. So we must be aware, we must understand what the difference or what the similarity is between the type and the data and the information. We have three terms. Additional terms we have, it's variable. It's also connected with the data. It's also related to the data. It's something that we are using to hold the data, to preserve the data. Next, we'll talk about the anonymous types, partial types, and methods, and Jonix. These 3 points are related to the language, related to this environment, but I think that all of that are also very important for general terms, for general approaches. But to start, before starting, let's start me ask you questions, because as you know, as I promised during the lecture, during the seminar, it's not lecture, I think it's seminar, because I hope we'll be able to communicate with each other to make sure that all the time we are on the same page, to make sure that I'm not talking just to the wall. I try to ask questions and I try to follow your answers, because it's impossible to follow all of your answers. Therefore, I try to notice only the most important one. But first question, it is very easy way to collect activity scores, because the first couple of questions relates to the previous lecture. So previously, I hope I provided appropriate description, I provided appropriate definition, so we understand the terms. So now let's check if it's true. My first question is, can information be a a direct subject of computation. Stop, don't answer as long as I provide the question on the chat. Yes. To understand the difference between the data and the information, so there's a lot of answers. So let's ask another question. Stop discussing this. There's more open question. What is the data? What is the data? But again, don't provide me any essays. Don't provide me any huge description. Just a few words. All of the question is possible to answer in to all of the question in just a few words. Okay, so let's go to programming technologies master plan, schedule, assessment, defense, resources. Okay, we discussed it. So let's go to the vcamp. Where is the vcamp? Because it's somewhere over there. It's not your classes. Let's open your classes now. Okay. You remember that all of the recording will be published using recordings, this module. In these modules, in recordings, it's not available for you, but there is collection of recordings from the previous edition. But on the references, here you can find recording lessons, you can find access URL to the recordings that the recording of the previous edition of this classes. So let's start discussion about the deadline. So the first task must be accomplished up to the 6th week. So there is no much time. There's no time to waste. You must start developing, I think, as soon as possible. Today, during the project lesson, I provided some details. I'm going to provide to the next lesson also some details related to creation of the GitHub repository and how to use the development environment. So my next question for you, because it is just introduction, let's see if you understand what is external data. Previously, we answered the question what is data. Now, what is external data? What's the difference between the data and external data? Tasks 1, collections. Task 1 is dedicated to collections. I'll try to enlarge it to make sure that everyone can read it. So the goal of this task is to implement selected business process. For me, it doesn't matter what the business process is. It could be library, shop, warehouse, but they are only examples. But here it's quite important thing, because the application must be layered. What it means, layered application? You must answer this question. And actually, we will answer this question later during the next part of this seminar. What is layered application? How to prove that the application is layered? Remember that everything what you are going to submit for assessment, to submit to review by me, there must be no doubts that, for example, we have layered applications. So any general description and general idea is not enough. we must have simple measures, and the measures must be well understood by you and by me. So define data layer using the .NET collections in example application. And collections, it is next keyword. What is collections? We must answer this question, and actually you must answer the question what the collection is. Because it's important part of your work. But the most important thing here, it is that the answer must be in terms of the language. It's not impossible to discuss any terms, any concept, abstracting from the language, using native language. The same it's for layered applications. Now it's next collection. What is a collection? We must know what is collection, but in terms of the language, not in general terms, in using the native language. Using the collections and applying the collection, I am expecting that you will create data, actually types. We don't know what the type is now. I hope you know, but we haven't answered the question what the type is precisely. But what I'm expecting from you, it is to use appropriate types, and these types you can use as a prefix, as metadata of the variables. To say, for example, that the variable is responsible to provide functionality of the catalog. Catalog means that it's a list of products, and we need for this products selected keys that we can use to get the full description of the product from the catalog. It could be the name, could be ID. It's like with the cars. You can use the name of the car, but it's not enough because the same name of the car could be used many different cars. It is just a series of cars. In this way, we also need to use something to provide unique name of the description and the description itself. Next, what is the most important thing for the business processes is to represent a history. Historization of the process is a very important thing, so we must know what happens in a selected points in times. For example, you are borrowing a book, or you are returning the book. It's events. We try to answer this question just in a second, but here, very important thing is what is the event? But try to answer this question by yourself. Don't put the answer on the chat. But I have for you the next question on the chat. It also refers to the previous my talk. What a computer program is. What is computer program? Okay, so events. Next, it's we need to maintain the state of the process. So the process behaves. So what it means behaves? It means that the process changes the state. Each process, business process, has internal state, and we are changing the state. For example, goods on the shelf or books on the shelf. If you are borrowing, the state changes. If you are returning, the state of the library changes. Therefore, we must provide appropriate functionality to support this behavior, to support this functionality. Define logic layer to implement all relevant operations. Why we need it is a good question, but I don't have it for now. Why we need layers? But maybe we'll answer this question later. Now ask me the last question related to the previous lecture. What is programming language? Because now we are talking about the task. We are talking about the algorithm. Because we are going about the business process. Of course, I don't care about the complexity of the business process, complexity of the algorithm. Mine goal is to be sure that you can implement this algorithm using selected programming language. So most important thing is to know what the programming language is, what I'm expecting from you. Okay. There are many reasons why we are using layers. Well, the software must be layered. Next, my question is related to dependency injection. But okay, let's continue your discussion. Remember that only the first good answers for me it is gets the activity scores. Therefore, you are going to repeat the previous question. The previous answer doesn't make sense because I will remove all of these answers. Okay, so let's get back to the layered application. A layered application, like everything that have layers, is very important. The question is why it is important for us. There is many reasons, but I hope we'll answer to this question previously. But one of the reasons is that the layer, if it's independent from the another layers, so if it's part, it is a largely coupled part. So it is part that is easy to remove and easy to replace, especially if we are talking about the technology, because the technology changes every day and will change in the future for sure. Therefore, if we provide a solution, we must deal with the problem, how the solution must be improved, how the solution in the future must be replaced by another solution that implements the same algorithm, provides the same functionality or similar functionality, but uses different technology. To follow up the technology changes, we need to provide a solution that it's easy, that there is no interaction, and there is no interaction. There is no interaction between the inside of the layer. Therefore, the layer must be exposed. The functionality of the layer must be exposed. We call this API, application program interface. And the next layer, the layer above, that are going to use this API, must use only this API to make sure that we are talking about the layer. So the layer above must call only, must use only functionality, must use only exposed members of the API from the layer below. It is a rule. But of course, we must answer the question in terms of the language, what the layer is, what the API is, in the terms of the language, because If we are not able to answer the question what the API is and what the layer is in terms of the language, it's impossible to fulfill the functionality, the requirements of the task. So we must know it, what it is. But to know it, we must learn some additional terms. We must discuss about some additional terms. Okay, but data layer, it's expected. It is expected that your solution will be in the layers. And I am expecting 2 layers. Let me get back to the previous lesson. We have data layer that is on the bottom of the application and is responsible to get access to the external data. Let me recall you that and get back to the question about the data and external data. So let me recall that the data is information representation. Only 2 words is enough. But the external data is a data that we must, that it's outside of the process. Because each program, as each software that is executed as a process. So this operating system executes program creating a process. Process is a boundary. Is a common boundary between the system, operating system, and between your functionality. So using this boundary, this common boundary, we can communicate with the rest of the world, with the external world. Therefore, we can distinguish what is internal and external because we have clearly stated common boundary between the operating system and your program. It's external data. What's the next? What was a computer program? What is the computer program? Program. It's there are many possibilities how to answer this question. We know that first it is implementation of the algorithm. It is implementation of the algorithm. To provide representation of the physical representation, because we are going to use physical machine, therefore the algorithm must be represented in a physical way. We need something that can be used by the machine as well, there's something wrong outside my window, but now I think it's not so noisy, so I can continue. Okay. When I finished, I finished that program. It must be represented. Program must represent an algorithm. To represent, we need something that could be used as a recipe for the machine. How to say the machine what to do, how to describe the behavior, how to describe the data, because computing process, it is processing of the data, not information. Information must be represented in the data as the data, and data is processed by the computer according to the program, and the program must be expressed using selected programming language. Programming language, let me recall, its alphabet, its syntax rules, and semantics rules. And we selected one of the program. So you must provide the program that it's expressed using selected language, and in this case, it must be C#. It must be C# because we selected this language as the language we are going to use. All of us are going to use as the common implementation platform. Additionally, so the responsibility of the layers, so the data is responsible to provide all of this mentioned previously data, and the logic layer is responsible to provide a functionality of the process business. Probably you have some doubts that in this task we don't have user interface, and actually there is no need to provide any user interface, including graphical user interface. Usually, if you are starting to develop any program, you are starting from the graphical user interface. It's something that it's typical for any your work. Doesn't matter what the graphical user interface is. It's depending. It depends on the platform. But in this case, it is not required. It is required to provide appropriate data structure of the data. That is first thing. Second, it's to provide functionality that is related to this data. But we are talking about the external data, but in this task, additionally, it is not required to get external data. Everything is in the memory. So everything, all the data is internal data. Therefore, you must provide, we call it data model or object model. So you must create a representation of the business process inside the memory, not referring to the external data, to databases or to the user interface or to files. Of course, it's possible if there is something that it's impossible for you to understand. You can use external data, you can use databases, you can use the graphical user interface. But let me stress, it's only complication of the problem. It is not expected, but if it is, if you decide to provide graphical user interface or the external data, you must completely understand what happens, how to use it, how to implement this functionality. But it's not easy. So keep things as simple as possible. It is my advice. Keep things as simple as possible. If something is not required, I'm not expecting that you provide something like that. For example, previously I was asked if it's required to use selected framework. It's not expected to use any frameworks. Everything you can do using just your program without any, of course, standard libraries, yes, but it's not framework. I am recognized framework as external libraries, as independent documentation and provide selected functionality. But what is expected from you, it's to use only the basic functionality provided by the development environment. Therefore, we must answer the question how to prove that the behavior of the program and the expected data is correct. In this case, we must use unit test. We haven't time to discuss unit tests during the previous lesson, but I promise that during the next week, during the project, we'll explore this term in more details. Therefore, to make progress in your work, just try to find some information, some basic information about unit test from the internet. And actually, I think that you have already, this term. And actually, there was subjects that required to use this unit test. So it shouldn't be something new for you. Unit test needs testing data. It's a tricky point because you must create this data without getting access to the external data. Only using something like simulation, you must create the data. But what is expected? It is expected that there's at least 2 data generation methods. For example, if you need, for some reasons, to use external data from files, you can use as one of the method to read the data from the file. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how the file is formatted. Doesn't matter. For me, it doesn't matter. But of course, in the production environment, it's the most important thing. But for me, it doesn't matter. For me, the most important thing is to understand that you are opening the file, you are reading the file, you must deserialize the data. What deserialization is, it's difficult topics, but we found, for example, you can create data using the hard coding. It is the simplest way. Just hard code it is one of the methods. Just hard code. Provide in your code, provide appropriate data to test the layer and to test the data. So let me summarize. Logic and data must be implemented in the library. So we must use the concept of the library. Library is a software that is reusable by many products. And actually, usually after compilation, the library cannot be directly executed by the operating system, but it's provided as deliverables that can be reused by in other solutions. So there's no need to implement presentation layer. How to make it? How it works? Okay. So there's no need to provide presentation layer. Presentation layer is responsible to manage the graphical user interface, to communicate with the user. It is not required. Instead of this layer, you must provide unit test, and using the unit test, you must test functionality of this of the layer of the logic and the data. Remember that you must provide layered application. Logic and data. It is possible to implement logic and data as one single library. It's possible. In this case, it is difficult to provide layered application and to prove that you have layered applications. Therefore, my advice is to implement logic and data in separated libraries, in 2 libraries. So create 2 libraries and provide implementation of the logic and data into independent libraries. To have the solution, of course, you can use one project for the unit test. It's possible to provide all the testing, but in this case, it's very difficult to have layered application, because using only one unit test, you must test the logic and the data at the same time. But it is required that the data and logic are two independent layers, and the data is a layer that is below the logic. So next advice is to use 2 independent unit tests. One unit test that refers the test that use the logic, and the second that tests the data layer. Of course, the data layer must expose to the logic and to the unit test appropriate API, application program interface. So the question is if the API should be the same for the logic and for the unit test. My answer is not. It's not necessary. It's not required. Sometimes for the unit test, we need more functionality to make sure that the layers behaves as expected, or it processes the data as expected. It provides the return data using the testing data as expected. Therefore, sometimes we need more functionality. The API is expanded for the unit test. The question is how to say the user of the data that some functionality is only dedicated for the unit test. It is your homework how to answer this, and actually answer to this question you can find in the example programs. In my repository, in TP repository, there is an example how to do it, how to implement, how to say that something is only dedicated for the unit test, that is not dedicated for the logic. And it must be very clear message. It should not be provided as a comment, as a description. It must be very clear. So on the other hand, using other words, logic should be for the logic, it should be impossible. It must be impossible to use the dedicated for the unit test functionality or a part of the API. Next problem that we have here, it is the testing the logic. If the logic refers to the data, we are also testing the data. We are testing both at the same time. In this case, we are talking not about the unit test, but we are talking about the integration test. Because it could be possible, as a side effect, it could be possible that the logic provides functionality, provides the wrong behavior, offers the wrong behavior, not because the problem is with the logic layer, but because it is a side effect of the data. So the data is incorrect, and the data as a side effect harms functionality of the logic. So your homework is, I hope you put notice, your homework is how to solve this problem, how to decouple logic and data to make sure that we are testing only logic and we are testing on the data layer. It is the next reason why we are using layers. Instead of the layers, we need to test the whole program. Usually it is impossible. Usually it is very difficult, at least. I know hundreds of solutions where people did forget about it. And now there's impossible to provide unit test. Many times I complained for the developers that the program do not provide unit test, but the answer is always the same, because the program is full mesh, and therefore it is very difficult to provide unit test, because we cannot distinguish the units. It's impossible to distinguish parts. Okay, are you still with me? I hope so. So the answer for you, okay, I'm not sure if it's somewhere here, but the answer, one of the answer, you can expand this answer, but the answer for this requirement, that the logic must be tested as independent part of the data. It is a unit for testing. Not for test, because each test who need to test embedded embedded unit, embedded in the whole part. Actually, there are two keywords that we can use to solve this problem. One keyword is abstraction, and second keyword is dependency injection. These two keywords, I try to discuss some details about the dependency injection today, I hope. But I hope that abstraction is a term you are familiar with and you know what the abstraction is. The only problem is how to implement this paradigm, this concept in a selected language. But it is this question is on my agenda for today. So we try to answer the question was the abstraction is and what the dependency injection is. Okay. So I think that's all. Here you can find details, but again, don't try to read everything because, for example, for dependency injections, there is a lot of books, and there is no need to have deep knowledge or a lot of experience with dependency injection. What is required to understand the problem, to understand the question, to know the answer to the question why object-oriented programming is not enough, that we need something else, that we need something extended. Why dependency injection extend the object-oriented programming concept as one whole? So, okay, so let's try. Maybe it is it's easier to start from dependency injection first. I know that probably we don't have appropriate knowledge, but I hope that we know what the abstraction is. So let me refer to this. Let me refer to this term and ask you, what for you dependency injection is? The question for now it is, what is dependency injection? Of course, it's shortly. You know that there are books related to this topic. I am expecting only a few words. It must be simplification. It must be something that provides a hint to idea what the dependency injection is. But let's discuss. I'm going to point out places where you can find answer to this question in the code. Not sure where's the code, but here it is. And here I'm using older version of the Visual Studio. Probably you will use the newer one, but to use the newer one, I need to open. I don't have this here, so let me go to virtual machine, and on the virtual machine, I have time to answer my question. So let me ask another question. It's a very difficult question. What condition decides about necessity to use dependency injection? But just wait a second. I can't find chat. It's here. If you have any question, don't hesitate. Raise your hand or just unmute your mic and ask me. What happens here? Something wrong with my password? Caps lock. Caps lock is something that We'll discuss dependency injection using an example during the project lesson next week. But now let me discuss it on this topic. Discuss me using an example that it's provided by the TP repository. TP repository, it's dedicated code, provides examples for our discussion, and here we can find dependency injection. But first I might start appropriate solution. Here you can find 3 solutions. One is for external data. It's more or less the scope of similar to R classes, but additionally we have also solution. I can see. Additionally, for adaptive programming and for mobile computing, for remote programming. So dependency injection you can find in introduction. Dependency injection application. Here is the dependency injection, but there is a project. It's library that my goal of this library, it is to provide some functionality, say similar functionality you have in the task. But the requirement for this functionality is that we must actually testing, we must answer 2 questions. First, to express the need to test expectation about the behavior. So we must test behavior of this of the application of this library. Second, it's to express expectation of the return data. Both expectation must be implemented using the terms of the language. Therefore, let's discuss it on this example. And in this example, here, property injection, I have a few methods. One method, second methods, alpha, bravo, Charlie, and delta. And my goal is to check that all the methods are called in a sequence. So actually, I must trace the information that first we are calling alpha, next we are calling bravo, Charlie, delta, and delta is the last. So we must provide a feedback. Usually, it is not expected in the task. Usually, you are using user interface to provide similar functionality. So we must check. In this case, this functionality is provided by dependency injection application. Using right-click and debug, or using this start, but first we must select appropriate project, dependency application. It is the project that actually is executable. So can be executed by the operating system. What I'm doing now is it's to start execution of this program in selected operating system. In this case is Windows. But the library is portable, can be used in an environment. So for example, using the start button, we can start the application. It takes a while, but after a while, we can get the user interface. It is one possibility to provide feedback to the user or to communicate with the user using console-like application. So it's like console. It is for communication, not for graphical communication, but for text communication. So we can write text on the screen, we can read text from the screen. So we must deal with text, not graphics. But as I said previously, it is not expected in your case that for the task 1 you provide any interface, but it's typical approach. When I as a user can read that some information. For example, I can read that I am entering alpha, I am entering Bravo, I am entering Charlie and Delta. Additionally, here you can find some IDs. How to use these IDs, it is up to you. It is your homework. I expect that you will, after the lecture, you will analyze the code to be prepared for the next lesson, because during the next lesson, during the project lesson, I'll do the same, but from scratch. Here you have ready-to-use code, but during the next lesson, I start from scratch. I'll try to provide the example, try to develop the example starting from the very beginning. It is useless for the automatic testing. For example, if we are going to test our software on a selected server during a night session, this interface is useless because we don't expect that there will be any human that could read this and assess. And actually, if you have a complicated code, you can provide on the screen a lot of info, a lot of data, a lot of text. So even for you, after a couple of months, it will be very difficult to assess. It will be very difficult to judge if the answer is as expected. Therefore, we should avoid things like that. We should avoid things like that, but it's possible. It is one of the possibility how to test the application. It's to provide data that can be used by the human to answer the question if the behavior if the data provided by the application is as expected. But additionally, we are going to test it using the unit test. So here you can find unit test. And in this unit test, for example, here it's constructor injection unit test. Here we are testing behavior of our software. Of course, it is not real unit test because the sequence of calls should be implemented in a library in an application. Here is implemented in using test because it's for didactic purpose, unit test. So we are actually describing how it works and actually testing at the same time, I am providing the information how to test scenarios like this. So here we are creating an object of the selected class. Next, I am calling this methods, and additionally, I'm checking consistency. I'm checking if everything is okay. So now it is also the library, but the library, it is test class. We'll discuss about test classes, test methods, things like that during the project. So now it is, because it's lecture, so I'm not going to avoid a discussion about it. I'm not going to waste time to discuss simple things. Probably most of you know these things, but to make sure, we'll get back to these topics during the project lesson. But using the right mouse, you can run the test. So we can execute it. It is similar approach. Previously, we executed the software, we executed the program as a process. Here we are executing also as a process, but it's internal process of the development environment, and that's all. After execution, we can read the results. So run it. Let me open it to make sure that we can look at the results and run in again. Talking about the correctness of the application, we are talking about actually two options. It's correct or it is incorrect. There is no more options. It is first approach, of course. Therefore, we are expecting answers in two colors, in a green or in red. So the question for you, for thinking for a while, and actually answering this question next time during the project lesson, is how it's possible to answer the question if the behavior of this program is complicated behavior, because we are trying to find a sequence of calls to the methods. Therefore, it's not very easy task even for the human. But in this case, we must, at the end of the day, we must provide the answer. It's correct or not. After modification, you can check it, cloning the software on your computer, on your local computer. You can execute the test again. And before execution, let's check the sequence. You can test that everything works, and you will get the answer in red, signaling that something is wrong with the code and the sequence is wrong. But still, using this approach, we can use automatic testing, because the test can be run in the development environment, continuous development environment during the night session. And after the night, after getting back to the work morning, we'll getting the answer. Everything is okay, or there is something wrong with the code. Don't think about the situation where there is something wrong with your code. It's very hard to explain your boss why your code it's doesn't pass all the unit test. That is impossible to pass unit test. Therefore, for us, it's very important. We start assessment of your task, executing all the unit test. And if there's something wrong with the unit test, you doesn't pass. You are wasting your point. Actually, you are collecting penalty points, penalty scores, because you must correct your software to provide that all the unit test works for you. So the rest discussion and analysis of this part of this software left you for as your homework. But here's the starting point and finishing point. Actually, you must start from this. If it's something that you don't understand, be careful and ask me question during the next lesson, where I'm going to add to my agenda development, implementation of the simple, not this is not simple, but I'm going to provide very simple example of the dependency injection. But in this case, you are dealing with dependency injection. Why you are dealing with dependency injection? Actually, the answer is on the screen. Where is the dependency injection and what it means? Dependency injection. But let's keep this the answer to this question as your homework. Answer is, as I said, in this line, in the line number 20. It is the answer, what is dependency injection, but there is no answer what condition decides And then my next question for this, make sure that someone knows what the dependency injection is polymorphism required to use dependency injection? No, yes, no, it's good answer. No, it's not required. It's not required. It is not the reason. It's not my reason. If you have if you need polymorphic problem, it is not. It is not required. But let's get back to the task because we don't have time. But you must start developing. There is one. There's a helper for you. Just a second, because I have too many. I have too many windows opened, and it's difficult to me to find something. Okay, so here you can find diagram that it's something. I know that you are familiar with UML diagram, especially class diagram. It is class diagram. And this diagram explains, it is just a graphical illustration of the text. So you need to implement the data as a catalog. You must also represent something that it's state. You must represent users of the process. For example, members of the library, or no, any users. That it depends, of course, of the process. But it's very important to have also the events. All of that, as you can see, it is aggregation of information because all of that grows. For example, at any time, it should be possible to add the next user. It should be also possible to remove the user. But the most important thing is that the list of user could grow. That is, it should be possible to add additional user. Next, catalog. Catalog is description of a good. For example, is description of the book, but it is not description of the example of the book, of the selected item, selected entity. It is general description. For example, it is title and the author of the book. So we could have many books that that meet this requirement, that has the same author and the same title. Therefore, here we have this relationship. One entry in the catalog could have many entities. On this diagram, I call it state, but actually it is related to the state. But if you are talking about an example of the book, it is not the state. It is not the state of the process. It contributes to the state of the process. It is an item in the process. So because it could be borrowed, or it could be returned, it could be on the shelf, or it could be outside of the library. Therefore, changing the state of one book, we are changing the state of the whole state of the library. But still, there must be relationships that the one book or the one state is related to the catalog. It is related to one description. The same is, sorry, my tool is not perfect. Here I must be on this screen, and now Event. What is the event? It's a good question. I don't know if I have this question here. Okay, no, I don't have the question on my list, but it's a very good question what the event is. But because it doesn't relate to this to the topic, it is just an example. So usually the definition depends on the process, but usually we can describe events as a description of the change of the process state. If you are changing the process state, for example, if you are borrowing or you are returning a book, it is an event. If you are selling a good, if you are buying a good to the shop, it's an event. Usually with the event, we have coupled together a document, for example, invoice, recipe or something that provides additional description of the event. But for us, the most important thing is that the event, it is something, it's change of the state, but this change has a date and a time. So it is a point in time. Usually one data, one information that we are using as a part of event description, it is the timestamp. We call it timestamp. Timestamp provides information about when it happens, about the time and data. So you must implement something like this and provide this relationship. Remember that each event is one change of the state. Therefore, depending on what the state is, if it's a book, it's complicated because for one book, we could have, of course, we have many events, borrowing and returning events. If the state is something else, it could be difficult to provide this relationship, but this relationship is required to make sure that we can historize, that we can get a history of the states in time. So we can get information when the book is borrowed and when the book was borrowed and when the book was returned. Okay, so it is all of that together should be provided to the functionality, because it's only data. Here we are not talking about the functionality. Of course, you can provide basic functionality for appropriate classes. It's not only possible, but it's also expected. But altogether must be provided by I call it data context. Of course, it's not required to follow all of these names. It's only enough to provide appropriate concept to implement this diagram. It's not simple. It's not simple thing. Okay, because we are approaching the next topic, let me ask in advance the next topic I'm going to discuss. There was a couple of questions related to the UML, but let me skip it for now. There's no time. Now let's ask you what the type is. What is the type? And I try to finish the discussion about this. So here there must be a simple point that collects access to all of the data. Usually, in the next, if you are going to use this implementation as entry to the next step, to the next task, here will be very good point to assign to use the external database. It is expected from the next task that you are going to use external database. But here is a very good point, because in this point, we are collecting access to the external data. In this case, in this task, it is required to implement all the data in memory as object model, not as external data. It's too complicated, but we'll get back to this topic next in task 2, to replace implementation in memory, to replace the implementation by the provided by the external database server or database management system. It is an example. It is good example, I think, when we can prove that layering of the software is very useful, because here at this point, if the API of sorry, not this. I'm trying to press my not. I'm going to draw an arrow, but sorry, maybe this way. It's arrow? No, it's not arrow. Oh, now it's arrow. Okay, so if data repository uses only the data context, here we can distinguish layers. We can distinguish two layers. Layer above and layer below. And here we can distinguish API. Data context provides application program interface that the data repository can use to get access to the data and to get access to the functionality. Of course, it is also possible in this model to provide layers here. So we have two places where to locate the layers, but still we need to answer the question what the layer is to make sure that the implementation. Now we are talking in an abstract way, but we must implement this abstraction. We must implement using the concrete environment, development environment. So it's API, data repository, data service. Data repository actually provide additional functionality to your data. For example, usually if you are borrowing a book, there's many things that can't happen at the same time. Therefore, you must modify a few data, a few items of the data, entities of the data at the same time. Therefore, it's useful to provide common functionality to do complex things. We'll discuss about complex data. We'll discuss about the structured data. But here it is a good place to provide functionality that is responsible to get access to the data, but not to get access directly to the data, but to get access to the composition of the data, to the complex data. Data service is a good place to provide application logic, to provide functionality that is expected from the selected business process. But where you are going to locate your API or locate your boundary of your layers, it's up to you. So it's a good point to ask questions. Do you have any questions? So it is not expected that you implement this diagram. The diagram it's just a helper. it is expected that you follow requirements in the task one. To follow all of these requirements, here you can use the checklist. The checklist provides details about what is expected. Actually, it is copy-paste of the text, but here it is exposed. Here it is. There are statements as requirements, not just as a description. The first 3 points. Sorry. The tool is so stupid. It's here on this screen. Now I'm on this screen, and now I can draw something. First thing is requirements. It's entry point. So you must provide the software. The build must succeed, must end with success, and you must also provide the user test, unit test, and all the unit tests must be in green. Remembering about all of the requirements that I stated previously, but I'm not expected from you appropriate coverage of the unit test. Usually, it could be measured. Usually, the development environment, including Visual Studio, provides additional functionality that can be used to assess the coverage of the unit test. I'm not expecting any special coverage, just 2 examples. And in these examples, it is very, I think, it is impossible to provide a good solution without dependency injection. So dependency injection we have over here. So dependency injection we have over here. As it says, additional framework, it's not required. But it must be implemented. Here you can find requirements related to describing the data object model, what is expected, and as the test text says, you must provide description of the user catalog process events, but it is required that you will use extensively collections. So you must be familiar what the collection is. But I'm expecting the answer in terms of the language. Actually, it could be in terms of any language. We are not discussing about this concrete language. We are discussing about the concept. But to make sure that our discussion is that we are on the same page, you must answer to this question referring to the terms we have in the development environment. We have in the language and related to the language, maybe this way. So data layer and logic must be clearly stated, so it must be layers. Still, we need to answer the question what the layer is to make sure. But my advice is use 2 projects. Using 2 projects, you will be almost sure that you are using layers. Remember about the unit test. The relationship between the unit test and the libraries must be also correct. Here I'm expecting 2 test data generation methods, testing data, because there is no required to provide graphical user interface. So it is good place to provide two independent implementation. For example, as an exercise, you can read the data from the file, for example. But be careful about it, how to do it, to make sure that it's still testing data. Now we are talking about the testing data, not about the production data. It must be very clearly distinguished. Production data and testing data. Testing data we are using to make sure that the behavior of the program and the return data, it's as expected, but the production data, it is functionalities that we are using to get any data why the library is embedded as a software and used by the end user. Okay, so it is checklist. So use this checklist to make sure that everything is okay with your code. Next, add the empty without any checks on this list. Issue with this checklist to the repository for me, because during the discussion we'll discuss selected points. You will point out in the software, in your program, you will point out, for example, where is the data layer located, how to prove that it's layer, where is two methods, generation data test generation methods. And answering this question correctly and finding in the software appropriate solution, we will check it to make sure that, of course, it will be impossible to check, to test your software to review all of these entities in context of any program. Therefore, usually I'm spending 30 minutes to discuss selected points, selected entities of this list. Usually it is 3-4 lists, depending on your activity, depending on your answers. I must be sure that you know what we are talking about, and that your software is your software. It's not something that you have copy paste from the GitHub, for example, from the open source. Any questions? Can we finish this part? So next question for me now, let's go to the type, and I'm not sure if this question will be clear. Just a second. No, doesn't work. What's this stupid tool? I'm trying to find the appropriate. Where it is? Ah, it's here. It's over here. Okay. So we answered the question what the type is. Now the question is, let's refer to our lecture again. And the question is, there's a typo. It seems that I've lost my first character. But the question is, what values are in the Roman time? Because answering the previous question, let me go to the example solution. And here we have property Roman type. It's an example. It's an example of the type. Usually in this and in other languages, we are using type as a prefix of the variable. Here we have a variable, and this variable has associated type. So it is a very important question about the type, because it is on the list for the engineering exam to answer this question correctly. But the correct answer is that it's set of values and set of functionality that we can apply to these values. Here we have, for example, we have a type that calls long. So usually, not usually, always, in any languages, a type has a name. And with this name, we can associate a definition of the name. It is standard type. Therefore, it is enough to provide just an identifier of the type, but the definition is in the language. But you remember that previously during the previous lecture, we referred to the Roman values. So the question is what the Roman type is, because we can, using the modern languages, we can define all custom types, and one of the type I have defined here is Roman type. So the definition is provided in the program. Go to definition. Here we can use go to definition, and we can find that it's structure. It is structure. So the question is what values are in the Roman type, because it is set of values and set of operations. Therefore, the question is what the values are included or no. Next, my question is what the simple type is, because you remember that we have simple and complex type. We'll get back to these topics next time during the next lecture. Now let me answer only the question what values are in the Roman time. In this Roman time, the values we are bothering with, it's here in this line. So we know that we are using the same values as the integer use. So integer type that calls int in this case, we are using exactly the same values. So the set of values is exactly the same, but in this case, I have added some operations to the type. Therefore, I have expanded a type that we have in the language. Here you can find examples how to use this operation. If Roman is integer, it is impossible in this language to assign here string. In this line, you have an example where I am assigning string to the variable that it's of the string type. Here it should be impossible. So the homework for you is to answer the question, how is it possible that in this case, I can use the same approach, that I'm using the same semantics and the same syntax, but we are talking about different types. It's homework for you. So it's all. It's all for now, for this lecture. It is time for your questions. Do you have any questions? So let's stop the discussion to make sure that there's no more answers. Next lesson, next lecture, we'll continue the discussion about the types. We'll get back to the, we will not get back to the dependency injection. I think that this lecture and the project, it's enough to discuss everything about the dependency injection. I'm switching off the recording.